So welcome again, everybody. Thank you for coming. I would like to remind everybody that if you give a response to somebody, if somebody makes a comment and you respond to them, please be respectful and speak for yourself and say how it impacted on you, just so that we can be respectful and nobody feels like somebody is jumping, down their throat or something. We have a speaker, a presenter today for the chapter. I'm very grateful to Tom Hall for volunteering. He's presenting the chapter for today, which is Zionism, myth number 3, Zionism is Judaism. And we can then discuss afterwards and see how it goes. I'd like to say that I actually have some comments of my own. So when Tom finishes, I would like to make them, if that's okay. It won't take me long, it'll be half a minute, but there's some things I need to say because that chapter was a little bit problematic for me. I'll explain later. So if that's okay, we'll see how we go. Tom, would you like to start? Are you happy to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to start.
Well done. So welcome, Tom. The stage is yours. The screen is yours.
Okay, thanks. Can everybody hear me okay?
I can hear you. Everybody hears Tom. Good. Well done.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So the chapter was chapter 3, Myth, Zionism is Judaism. As a preface, I should say that I am an atheist who was raised Catholic, so I'm the last person who should be talking about what Judaism is, but here I am anyway. So my understanding is that Zion is a word for Jerusalem, and Eretz Israel is the land of Israel, which is contested point about like what existed back in Roman days, et cetera, et cetera. I actually read this chapter 4 times and some other other material trying to understand this, and I found it extremely confusing. but I'm going to do my best job to explain what I think I read in this chapter. So and I reorganized things a little bit. This is not going to be chronological because I felt as if it wasn't really chronological the way Ilan wrote it. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try to put it a little bit more in order to make sense for my brain. So my understanding is that the Jewish Enlightenment movement in the 1700s was an effort to revive the language of Hebrew and to expand Jewish religious education to broader liberal arts, science, philosophy, etc. And that sort of set the ground for these harbingers of Zionism who sort of rode that Jewish Enlightenment movement into a connection to nationalism in some of their writings, and ultimately attempting to redefine Judaism as a movement for a national home in Palestine, which was really interesting to me in particular because I thought when I thought of Zionism and Judaism, I kind of thought of Zionism as sort of using Judaism as a justification. It never occurred to me that there was an actual movement to redefine Judaism as a religion into a national movement. So I thought that was kind of crazy. And then the idea of Palestine was that Eretz Israel was the original home of the Israelites. As far as I can tell, most of the historical evidence for that is in the Bible and not well supported in the historical record, in the non-biblical historical record. So my understanding is that the Israelites who maybe lived in a land called Canaan or maybe other names were a people who the Romans, who went to war with the Romans around the early millennium, and then they were exiled into Egypt, and then there was, then the biblical records as Moses, led them out of exile, and et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, I guess the theory is that it was that the land now, which I understand to be Palestine, which they understand to be Judea and Samaria and Israel, was originally their homeland in the early millennium. So that's why the move back to Palestine, even though there were considerations of other places, Uganda, America, etc. So after the Russian pogroms in 1881, a group designated the Lovers of Zion took the Harbinger's ideas for a national home and a conversion to a national movement, and actually created a political program and began colonizing Palestine. So Theodor Herzl was one of the people. He wrote Judenstaat, which I've heard translated as Jew state or Jewish state, with the idea being that Palestine is a home, should be a state for Jewish people. Initially, Herzl supported assimilation, but he abandoned that in the 1890s, and started, being very pro-Zionism. Per Ilan, Zionism was only one expression of Jewish cultural life at the time, which was born out of two impulses. One was this need for safety and security and freedom from anti-Semitic pogroms, for example. And the second was this quest for a nation of their own, which coincided with this Spring of Nations concept, this series of revolts and upheavals in 1848, which I borrowed from another source. It didn't come out of the book, but I was trying to figure out what the European Spring of Nations was. So, also per Ilan, Jewish practice between the 1840s and 1880s generally manifested as either entrenchment, tight religious communities, a shunning of nationalism, being threatened by modernity and secularism, and secularism or reform, which in this chapter was very confusing to me because there's a reference to like liberal Zionism or liberal Judaism as contrasted with Reform Judaism. But then other things I found online say that liberal Judaism is just another way of saying Reform Judaism. So anybody who can shed light on that would be great. But yeah, so the Reform movement, which was a more secular, focused Judaism, was popular according to this in Germany, and then migrated to the U.S. Although in a recent interview I saw with Ilan, he was saying that it started more in Britain, so I'm not really sure about that either. It's like a history lesson from a non-historian, but anyway, that's me. I mean, Ilan is obviously a historian. So religious Zionism was another manifestation of Zionism. So there was the movement for like a nation state, and then there's my understanding is that really Zionists are like the idea of a nation of Jews and a nation for Jews in Palestine is sort of core to all Zionism, but then some justify it through secular rationale and others justify it through religious rationale, and in a bit we'll talk about biblical rationale. But Ilan points out that religious Zionism is the ideological home of Gush Emunim, the Messianic settler movement, and argues that colonization is not just okay, but a religious imperative. So, yeah, and I have a question about that I hope can be clarified. I don't know if all settlers today are Messianic Jews, or if most of them, or some of them, but it definitely seems like that was how it started. And then in pre-Zionist Judaism, the Bible wasn't taught as a political or a nationalist text, but it was focused more on religious theology. And the Lovers of Zion read the biblical narrative as a story of a national struggle for a homeland, whereas the whereas the religious Jews saw it as more a story of God and liberation of the nation of the Jewish people. Further to the rise of the biblical justification, the post-1904 fixation on colonizing Palestine was fueled by the rise of Christian Zionism. So again, I know more recent sources have cited evangelical Christians as sort of the originators of the Zionist idea, like as early as 1840. Anita Shapira writes about that, and then I was just watching an interview with Ilan from a few days ago, and he mentioned that as well. So I thought that was interesting because that I don't think comes up in this book that I remember. But yeah, it sounds like the evangelical Christians were the first to say, like, hey, we want the second coming of Jesus, and according to our understanding of the Bible, that means the Jews have to go back to Palestine, and then they have to either convert to Christianity or burn in hell, as I understand it. But it's all like part of the same project. So, and then Ilan writes, from that moment onward, the Bible became the justification and the route map for colonization. So again, reiterating what I said earlier, Israel in this narrative existed till 70 CE when the Romans demolished it and exiled the Jews. But that a lot of that relies on so-called biblical archaeology, which is of questionable historical value. Ben Gurion and all subsequent leaders until the 70s used biblical justification. That's what Ilan wrote, and then I added what happened then, because he didn't really say like what happened in the 70s that changed that, if that changed. He referenced Michael Pryor's The Bible and Colonialism, which sounds like a really good book I want to get, and which argues that apparently the Bible was used for colonialist justification all over the world at the time, and not just in Palestine. And there was a reference to Palestinians and those who are not Jewish enough being Amalekites, which I thought was interesting since Netanyahu himself had recently been quoted as referring to the Palestinians as Amalekites. And yeah, that was used in South Africa's case against them as genocidal language. So there's other genocidal references in the Bible and in the documents. The Jewish Haggadah at Pesach. I don't know. Passover guidebook is how it was defined on the internet when I looked it up. To use to justify the assassination of Rabin in '95 and a series of other murders of civilians in 2015. And then, while the Bible has been used as justification for Zionism since 1882, it was kind of a fringe concept until after the Six-Day War in '67, after which the Messianic settlers took it and ran. And that's where I ask, are they all Messianic, or is this just a section of them? Because I saw a documentary recently about the settlers in Hebron, and they definitely seem to all be Messianic in Hebron, at least. But so there was some opposition to Zionism throughout the whole project from the very beginning, and it came in parts from religious leaders who thought it was secularizing and modernizing, and they didn't like it for that reason. But it also came from secular Jews and reformists who thought that by promoting the idea of creating a state in Palestine, they would be accused of disloyalty to the nations where they lived and would suffer increased anti-Semitism. Thus, some believed going all in on religious orthodoxy, and others believed in making more of an effort to assimilate and secularize. In 1885, a reformist conference said, "We are no longer a nation, but a religious community." So this is another thing that was a little confusing to me in the book, because the reformists apparently started out as anti-Zionist, but then they became Zionist, but then they split into a Zionist and anti-Zionist segment. So I did extra reading on that outside, and I think I understand it more now. But in this in this reformist conference, Rabbi Kaufman Kohler had said colonization of Palestine unhomes Jews globally, basically arguing that by saying our home is Palestine, they were giving up their homes in Germany and Britain and US and wherever else they were ideologically. And then Wise, who was Isaac Mayer Wise, who was the father of the Reform movement, thought Herzl was a charlatan, was not a fan of Zionism. And yeah, this was another confusing thing to me where it says, apart from the reformers, liberal Jews also rejected Zionism, because I didn't really understand what Ilan meant about liberal Jews as contrasted with the reformers there. So, but they were arguing for a regeneration or a recommitment to their national homes, like wherever they were at the time. And then he throws in the fact that socialists and Orthodox Jews also opposed Zionism in the 1890s. And then adding the great Hasidic German Rabbi of Zitkover summed up this approach beautifully when he said that Zionism asked him to replace centuries of Jewish wisdom and law for a rag, soil, and a song, i.e. a flag, this land, and an anthem. Eventually, the reformists who initially rejected Zionism after 1948, they shifted into being pro-Zionist, and then they split into at least the American Council of Judaism, who wanted to focus on being fully religious and identify as American, and the Central Conference of American Rabbis, who fully embrace Zionism. Further, I mean, they do early on, but then also the most recent document I was able to find was a resolution they published in 1997, right before the 100th anniversary of 1948, saying, or right before the 100th anniversary of Zionism, saying, you know, we are fully Zionist or whatever. And then there's this quote, in other words, though the socialists did not believe in God, he had nonetheless promised them Palestine, which is another thing that I just think is funny, because that often, I have often thought about that as a strange dichotomy, but oxymoron or whatever, that, you know, God promised us this land. Even people who don't believe in God say that. But okay, so anyway, my conclusion, my biggest takeaway, like I said earlier, but biggest takeaway was, oh, I didn't realize Zionism was an attempt to redefine Judaism. That was interesting to me. But I think for such a huge question, or two questions, what is Zionism? What is Judaism? I mean, obviously, you know, 10 pages or however long this chapter was, nowhere near long enough to go into like what is Judaism and what is Zionism. But I thought it did a pretty good job of giving a taste of just the differences. So to me, like, even just at face value, if you understand the complexity of Judaism and its expression and its different branches and the different values of Jews around the world and throughout history, and then the very specific project of Zionism, you know, it's just obviously inaccurate to say Zionism is Judaism. So one is a very simple political project, and the other one is a very complex ideology. So hopefully I kept that in.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, you did brilliantly. This was a fantastic presentation. I like how you summarized the book, but also did a bit of research beyond it, and you expressed your own bits where you struggled a bit, where you didn't understand, because I'm sure that's shared with other people as well. Now, I said that I'm asking permission to make just a few comments, and briefly. First of all, I have had a problem with this chapter. Not because there's anything wrong with it, but because I thought it would end up more confusing than illuminating, particularly for non-Jewish readers. So those of us who come from various facets of that culture, and especially those of us who might have grown up in Israel, we know this stuff actually. But it sounds confusing, I think, and I think that for activists, the question of is Judaism Zionism, or is Zionism Judaism, are they the same, is a really, really important question, because it's very easy to be called anti-Semitic when you're criticizing Israel. So it's really actually quite important to understand it. And I'm a bit sad that Ilan actually did not address that. He gave a really good and quick historical sort of context, but that question was missing for me. So I'd like to, if I may, I'm putting it in this in the chat. I'm actually sharing with you my Substack essay called Spilling the Dirty Laundry on Israel, which is actually talking about this and also showing my birth certificate, which actually is quite significant. What I want to say briefly is this: Israel has hijacked Jewish identity and conflated it, completely mashed it up with Zionist identity. Now, basically, what it means is, or from the beginning of Israel, and increasingly, being Jewish means you have to support Israel unquestionably. That is your tribe, that is your people. So it doesn't matter what kind of Jew you are, you're expected to support Israel. This book that I edited in 2012, and then it was republished in 2018, has 25 stories of those of us who came out of this Zionist brainwashing and what that means. And what's interesting is that some of the writers grew up in religious Jewish communities, particularly in the United States, were members of synagogues. And they say that they were brought up on really good values of what Judaism is, but it didn't cover the Palestinians. So basically, according to their version of, I think that's Reform Judaism now, that's what we call liberal Judaism now, but it's basically those synagogues with women and men sit together, and you don't have to wear traditional clothing, and your diet might not even be that strict, but you're still Jewish. The idea is that if you might extend human rights to anybody except the Palestinians, because the Palestinians are the enemy of Israel. They're populating the land that the Zionist movement wants, and therefore you can't support them. And these people who came out of that kind of belief system said, well, the values I was taught in my Jewish religion do not fit what you're asking me to do in supporting Israel. And just one last point, in practice, the state of Israel uses a fictitious racial definition of Jewishness. So it doesn't matter what kind of a person you are. You might be completely atheist, you don't believe in God at all, you might not follow any Jewish festivals. I stopped following Jewish festivals even when I was still in Israel. In Israel, there are secular Jews, there are atheist Jews, there are Buddhist Jews, there are New Age Jews, there are all kinds of Jews. What makes them allegedly Jewish, according to Israel, is blood, it's race. And that's a completely outdated and discounted thing, that there is a race. But what really Israel did is it borrowed this definition from anti-Semitism, from basically race science of the 19th century. And basically that's it. That's what makes you Jewish in Israel, is not whether you practice religion or not, Jewish religion, but your blood. So if Israel defined Jewishness as being a Zionist, and that's what makes you Jewish, then you can see how anybody who criticizes Israel is automatically anti-Semitic. If Israel speaks for all Jews, no matter what they are, where they are, if you criticize Israel, that's why they call you anti-Semitic. So that's all I wanted to say. I hope maybe that helps to dispel a little bit of perhaps the confusion that I thought was in the chapter. Bye, everybody. Thank you.